Hey guys, tonight we're taking a very slow, very sleepy walk through one of the most rigidly polite societies in history, Confucian China. Imagine yourself standing at the massive carved gates of a provincial magistrate's home. You've traveled for days through dusty roads, dodging ox carts and traders, just to deliver a minor document of bureaucratic interest. You're sweaty, your robes are crooked, and your sandals are fraying, but none of that matters as much as this one thought. You do not remember if bowing 12 times is too much or not enough. Yes, tonight, we'll be exploring the wildly detailed world of Confucian etiquette manuals. The ones that instructed people not just how to live virtuously, but how to sit, walk, chew, sneeze, and respond to compliments about their curtains. You're about to be pulled into a dream of precise toe placement and ceremonious sleeve flicking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. You love seeing where everyone's dozing off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the main hall, the low hum of conversation muffled behind thick wooden doors. You rehearse in your mind the 12-step bow you're expected to perform. First, feet shoulder width apart. Second, fold your arms in front. Right over left, never left over right, unless it's a funeral or someone's birthday. Third, lower your upper body at precisely a 30-degree angle. Fourth, while bowing, your eyes must look respectfully downward, but not too downward, lest you seem inattentive. You begin to realize something uncomfortable. You don't remember step 5. And that's a problem, because according to the Yilioni of the core Confucian ritual texts, bowing too few times is insulting, but bowing too many implies excessive guilt or mockery. 12 bows were standard before an emperor, but variations existed: 9 for a prince, 7 for a minister, and 5 for your weird cousin who once tried to raise a dragon in his pond. Historians still argue whether the numbers had deeper numerological meanings, or were just a flex of bureaucratic memory. You enter the hall and face the official. A small silence expands. Your toes, still dusty from the journey, twitch nervously inside your shoes. You lower yourself. Once, twice, 3 times. By the 6th bow, you're sweating. At 8, your knees are cracking. At 10, you briefly forget your own name. But you finish all 12, even adding a bonus flutter of the sleeve at the end. A bold move, some might say, or suicidal. The official nods without a word. You've passed barely. What makes these etiquette manuals especially charming is their unapologetic obsession with detail. The Li Ji, or Book of Rites, devotes entire chapters to how different people should greet each other. Elders expect a more deferential bend. Children are to bow with the right hand slightly lower, suggesting humility, but not cowardice. And when two equals meet, you're to perform what scholars now nickname the awkward mirror, each trying to outrespect the other by matching bows, until someone's back gives out. You pause to take a deep breath. Even in your imagination, all this bending has made your calves sore. Interestingly, modern reconstructions of Confucian ceremonies involve debates about posture angles. Some scholars insist the body tilt was meant to mimic bird courtship display, graceful, fluid, and deliberately avoidant of eye contact. Others claim it evolved from older shamanic rituals, where bowing was literally a form of energetic transmission. A third camp, less mystical and more sarcastic, just points out that all of this probably made life miserable for people with arthritis. Your host waves you forward. You step onto a woven reed mat, then immediately remember that stepping on the edge of the mat first is a grievous fox pause. You try to rewind your foot in midair, which results in an unintentionally elegant pirouette. The official raises an eyebrow. You cough politely and pretend it was part of the dance. Some manuals go even further, indicating that bowing should be done silent. No audible exhale. No whisper. Doug. My spine. A nobleman in the Tang dynasty once lost favor with the court for letting out a groan during a particularly long meal. His critics accused him of emotional excess and digestive unrest. Still, the point of all these rituals wasn't just to make life difficult. Confucianism emphasized harmony, respect, and the smooth flow of relationships. Every gesture was a kind of language, a silent poetry of limbs. To bow correctly was to say, I acknowledge you, I place you above my whims, and I will now slowly collapse in your honor. And if you happen to faint from low blood sugar halfway through, well, so be it. You're finally seated. Your legs, folded under you at a 45-degree angle, begin to tingle. Your spine is straight. Your eyes slightly downcast. You have not spoken. You have not moved. You have not breathed in what feels like 20 minutes. And now the real challenge begins. You must stay like this through the entire tea ceremony. But that's for later. For now, you sit in your awkward perfection, marveling at the oddly soothing tyranny of ancient manners. The room is quiet. The air smells faintly of ink and sandalwood. The candlelight flickers just enough to make the ceremonial blades look friendly. You wonder how many bows you'll need to perform on the way out. Probably 12. But maybe 13. Just in case. So now that you've bowed yourself halfway into a permanent stoop, you discover that the real challenge isn't lowering yourself before your elder sits managing your sleeves. Yes, your sleeves. Long, wide, often wildly impractical sleeves. The kind that drag through soup bowls, knock over inkstones, and get tangled in doorways. And yet, in Confucian society, sleeves weren't just part of the outfit. They were the outfit's morality. Your sleeve size, length, and flutter cadences. Flutter cadence could speak volumes about your character before you even opened your mouth. As you adjust your robes for an afternoon visit to your mentor's home, you find yourself wondering, are my sleeves long enough to show respect, but not so long I look like I'm trying too hard? The etiquette manuals are, of course, devastatingly clear. Scholar officials should wear sleeves that extend just past the wrist, creating a graceful curve when hands are folded. Artisans may wear slightly shorter sleeves, functional, crisp. Peasants, practically sleeveless, but no judgment. Except there was always judgment. Fluttering sleeves during movement were expected to follow what one Ming-era manual called the rhythm of virtue. You should not flail. You should not drag. Instead, the ideal motion was a gentle, delayed sway like a silk banner responding to a wise breeze. Historians still argue whether this was actually possible or just aspirational nonsense, invented by elderly calligraphers who hadn't walked briskly in decades. Still, there were consequences for sleeve crimes. One young student attending his first formal banquet in Luoyang was so nervous that he tucked his sleeves behind his ears for convenience. This may have been practical. It didn't spill a single dumpling, but it violated 3 unwritten codes, 2 written ones, and the silent disapproval of every guest over the age of 40. He was later excluded from the group poetry recital, which in Confucian terms is the equivalent of being banished to the outer provinces of taste. Let's not even begin with sleeve color. Let's absolutely begin with sleeve color. During periods of mourning, you were expected to wear pale gray or dull white. During festivals, brighter tones were acceptable, but not so bright as to appear boastful. Crimson was reserved for certain rites. Yellow could only be worn by the emperor or his favorites. If you mistakenly wore a robe with golden trim to your cousin's wedding banquet, you might be mistaken for someone claiming imperial favor. That sort of thing could spark palace whispers. Or, worse, anti-gossip. And yes, there was even such a thing as seasonal sleeve behavior. Winter sleeves were to remain still, steady, comforting like the hush of snow. Summer sleeves, by contrast, could be allowed a light sway, signaling openness and clarity of heart. Windy days were considered a test of discipline. Did your sleeve flap too aggressively in the courtyard? That's not the wind's fault, it's your lack of composure. One Tang official famously tied small jade weights into the hems of his sleeves to ensure the perfect controlled descent as he bowed. This innovation was so admired that it sparked a brief trend among court ministers, until someone's weights accidentally shattered a porcelain teacup during a ceremony. The practice was then quietly discouraged. There were fringe beliefs, too many of them barely recorded, but whispered from teacher to student. One claimed that if your left sleeve fluttered more than your right during a temple visit, the spirits would think you were mocking them. Another insisted that sleeves that swayed in perfect symmetry could ward off petty bureaucratic complaints. You, of course, tried to swing your sleeves evenly just in case. But your left arm is stronger than your right, and now you look like a Confucian windmill. Of course, the broader idea behind sleeve discipline was that your outer form reflected your inner order. A person with erratic sleeves was presumed to have an erratic mind. Just as a musician tunes their instrument before a concert, the Confucian gentleman tuned his clothing before entering society. Adjusting sleeves, straightening hems, tightening sash tiset was all a way of saying, I respect the world I'm walking into. And speaking of walking, try not to let your sleeves flap against your legs as you move. That was considered vulgar, even in provincial circles. The preferred posture was upright but not rigid, calm but not dawdling, with sleeves lifted ever so slightly by the forearm's natural curvature. Try doing that while carrying a scroll, a fan, and an overripe pear for your uncle. Suddenly the path of virtue seems full of wardrobe malfunctions. Somewhere, you read a passage in an old etiquette scroll that stuck with you. Let your sleeves rest as the river rests, with gravity, not haste. You didn't fully understand it at the time. Now, halfway through a walk where you've tried and failed 3 times to keep your sleeves from catching in the temple gate, you think you might. Maybe the point was never about control but about surrendering to the absurdity of appearances, while still pretending you've mastered them. Modern scholars debate whether the strictness of sleeve decorum was mainly a courtly obsession, or if these norms genuinely trickled down into middle-class homes. After all, most people had work to do. They couldn't waste time worrying about whether their robe hem gently kissed their kneecap with each step. Still, poetry from even minor bureaucrats contains references to obedient sleeves and the whisper of cloth well taught, suggesting that sleeve awareness was, if not universal, at least aspirational. You reach your destination. You straighten your sleeves one final time, press your palms together in a practiced clasp, and bow, letting your sleeves drift downward like a sigh from heaven. Did you do it right? Probably not. But your mentor smiles, which is more than most manuals promise. For now, your sleeves have passed their test. You think you're ready for a quiet dinner. Maybe some steamed fish, a few laughs with friends, a light-hearted chat about poetry. But now Confucian etiquette has other plans. You're about to sit down at a banquet, which means you are also entering a labyrinth of invisible rules where every bite is a test. And the seating chart is basically a social minefield disguised as hospitality. As you approach the dining hall stone-floored, incense-warmed, lit by the soft glow of paper lanterns, you instinctively hesitate. Where you sit depends not only on your age and rank, but also on who's hosting, who just got promoted, and whether the Moon Festival happened last week. You might think, I'll just wait to be told. No, that's passive and rude, but also assuming your own seat. Presumptuous. The only solution. Hover uncomfortably until someone gestures politely while making intense eye contact. In Confucian banquets, seniority reigns supreme. The eldest guest, often seated at the northernmost position, anchored the table's harmony. Everyone else radiated out from that point like ripples in a very anxious pond. You, of course, are somewhere near the midline, important enough to not be near the firewood stack, but not quite worthy of the lacquered stool with the dragon inlay. You lower yourself into your seat carefully, with minimal creaking. Your sleeves must rest atop your thighs. Do not let them touch the table. Touching the table implies impatience. Your knees should remain close together, but not clenched. That suggests constipation, which, historically, was considered bad feng shui. Then comes the first course of rice porridge. Seems simple enough. Right? Wrong. There's a correct way to receive it. First, nod to the server. Then, gently lift your bowl not too high. Never with both hands if you're junior, and incline your head at just the right angle, as if thanking the heavens for starch. Historians still argue whether this ritual was originally religious or just a pragmatic way to avoid soup burns. One of your companions, a minor court scribe, makes the mistake of slurping his porridge with enthusiasm. The sound echoes. Chopsticks freeze. Across the room, someone coughs meaningfully. Slurping, you see, was acceptable in street-side noodle stalls, but in formal dining, absolutely not. Not even quietly. Better to let your porridge cool and risk looking dainty than risk sounding uncouth. Next comes pickled vegetables, placed communally in a beautiful, overly large ceramic dish. You may not serve yourself. Wait for the host to offer, ideally using special communal chopsticks. If you use your own, you might as well recite your resignation letter on the spot. And when you do finally take something, it must be the smallest portion, taken from the edge, rotated clockwise to your plate. One Confucian text insisted that a gentleman never stabs food with haste, which you now realize is a direct rebuke of your instinct to skewer that radish like a kebab. The order of eating matters too. Begin with rice, move to soup, sample to bites of vegetable, then rice again. Meat should be consumed only after demonstrating proper gratitude with a small toaster, at the very least. A whispered compliment to the host's great-grandmother, whose spice recipe no doubt inspired this marinade. Hyperbole is etiquette's favorite tool. Let's talk sauces. You see 5. You recognize none. You dare not ask. Instead, you follow your neighbor's ledip. Swirl, pause, consume. He nods approvingly. You feel a rush of validation and relief. 10 minutes later, you realize that was actually the finger-cleaning bowl. Your mouth now tastes faintly of lemon and social defeat. Still, you keep going. At some point, the host raises his cup. This is your moment. You must toast, but not first. Being the first to raise a cup can signal arrogance. Being the last, indifference. You must hover somewhere in the middle. And when you do raise it, the rim of your cup should never rise higher than that of your superiors. You angle downward ever so slightly. Cheers. You sip. Just a sip. Emptying your cup is only acceptable after 3 rounds, and only if someone else suggests it. You want to ask for more tea, but you don't ask. You perform the 2-finger tap on the tabli, a sign of gratitude and gentle request. This originates from a Qing dynasty tale where a servant, unable to speak aloud in the emperor's presence, used this code after being served tea. Historians still debate whether this story is true or just a very elegant urban legend. Either way, it saves you from shouting refill, please, in a room full of silent chewing. Dessert arrives. Rice cakes. Beautiful. Glutinous. Dangerous. Taking more than one is a clear breach. Taking the last piece. Social suicide. You let it sit. Uneaten. It will be rewrapped and sent home, as per custom, to be shared with your household, who will then critique your portion for not including the sesame one. As the meal winds down, you stand only when the host does. Bow gently. Compliment the food. Compliment the furniture. Compliment the weather if necessary. You exit with slow steps. You are full. Yes, but mostly with anxiety. Still, you did it. You survived a Confucian banquet. You neither insulted a nobleman nor declared war by seating mishap. Your reward: a scroll of etiquette to memorize before breakfast and a slightly tilted bowl of leftovers because the servant tilted it slightly too far when trying to honor your rank. So technically, you've now committed an offense against symmetry. But that's tomorrow's problem. After the banquet, you step out into the courtyard, full of moonlight, mist, and mild existential dread about how your ankles behaved during dessert. But the evening's not done. There's still the matter of your shoes. In Confucian etiquette, even your footwear had personality. And much like everything else in this world of balance and hierarchy, how you wore your shoes where, when, and especially how you sat while wearing them was an entire discipline unto itself. Let's start with the shoes themselves. If you're a scholar, your standard fare is soft-soled, cloth-bound, maybe embroidered with a modest cloud pattern. Black or dark blue is preferred practo, not flashy. Silk shoes, reserved for court functions, are slippery and deeply impractical on stone floors, meaning you're in a constant state of poised, almost slipping, which, in a way, is a perfect metaphor for your career. As you trudge up the garden path to your host's study, you remember to Lateith that your soles have picked up dust. The host's mat is light-colored bamboo. And suddenly, you're paralyzed. Do you step on it and risk visible footprints? Or do you remove your shoes, revealing your not quite matching socks? There's no clear directive here. Historians still argue whether indoor shoe removal was standardized across dynasties, or if it varied by region and class. Some texts insist shoes were left outside homes as a sign of humility. Others claim high-ranking guests kept them on to preserve dignity. So, which are you tonight? Humble or dignified? You opt for half removal, loosening the laces but leaving them on, which, ironically, suggests indecisiveness, a trait Confucianism ranked somewhere between mildly impolite and cowardly. You make a note to step more confidently on the mat next time, perhaps after triple-checking your heel-cleaning brush. But the real trial comes when you sit down. Sitting while wearing shoes is a choreography of restraint. Crossed legs. Absolutely no toneless, you're outdoors, among equals, and at least one of you is chewing sugarcane. Even then, it's frowned upon. Instead, place both feet flat, parallel, toes slightly turned inward to signify modesty. Ankles must not touch each other too tightly, too tense, but too far apart. Crude. There's a sweet spot, approximately the width of one closed fan, that Confucian scribes dubbed the gap of courtesy. You attempt this. Your left foot fidgets. Your right heel cramps. You distract yourself by folding your sleeves neatly into your lap. It doesn't help. The host begins reciting a poem about plum blossoms. You nod respectfully, hoping he doesn't notice that one of your socks has slid halfway down your ankle and is now bunching unpleasantly. Foot posture, you see, was a signal of one's inner tranquility. The term zhengzuo, or correct sitting, included implicit rules for what your feet did even when they weren't visible. Monks in training were said to meditate on their toe alignment to achieve spiritual discipline. You, on the other hand, are meditating on the sudden itch behind your left knee. Shoes also had a hierarchy of materials. Straw sandals, acceptable for travel and peasant work, but never in formal rooms. Leather, rare, costly, and mostly military. The Confucian ideal was modeste cloth with subtle embroidery, perhaps a stitched aphorism along the heel. One surviving pair from the Song dynasty bears the characters for patience steps before wisdom. You once saw a replica in a museum. It looked both uncomfortable and smug. And then there's the taboo of showing the sole of your shoe. This act, even accidental, could imply disdain, especially in a formal setting. One minor noble in the Yuan dynasty was recorded as having accidentally kicked his foot outward while sneezing during a tea recital. The host, insulted by the sight of dusty stitching, abruptly excused himself. The noble later sent 12 apology scrolls and a live goose. The goose was reportedly unimpressed. As a general rule, feet were to be hidden, humbled, and heard from never, which made walking its own ordeal. Your gait should be level, steady, silent. No scuffing, dragging, or bouncing. Dragging your heels suggested laziness. Walking too quickly implied aggression or poor impulse control. Many etiquette texts recommend stepping as though greeting each tile with intention, which sounds lovely until you remember how many tiles your host has. You rise, careful to press your weight evenly. As you do, one of your shoes squeaks faintly against the floor. A servant glances up. A minor scholar blinks. You contemplate disappearing into the koi pond. But not this is your moment. You slide one foot behind the other, clasp your hands modestly, and both feet close. Posture firm, sleeves still. Your shoes remain quiet. You survive the moment. Confucian etiquette, you realize, is not about eliminating error. It's about persisting gracefully despite the tiny failures that haunt every social step. Footwear included. Modern scholars still debate whether these rules were followed daily, or mainly on ceremonial occasions. One school of thought argues that daily life was looser, more forgiving. Another claims these standards shaped behavior so thoroughly that even peasants, when entering someone's home, would instinctively align their toes with the floor tiles. You make your way home, your shoes now dusty again but aligned, at least in spirit. You remove them at your doorway, toeing them off one at a time. They sit quietly beside the threshold worn, respectful, silent, like you. Back home in your study, with your shoes respectfully silent by the door, you breathe a small sigh of relief. But before you can pour tea or unroll your sleeping mat, there's another task awaiting you that feels deceptively simple: writing a letter. Confucian etiquette manuals would beg to differ. Writing correspondence, particularly in the classical tradition, is not just about conveying a message. It's an act of moral cultivation, a test of humility, clarity, and your ability to phrase "I need that document back" in 5 poetic metaphors without sounding passive-aggressive. You lay out your writing tools. A brush made from goat hair, soft but responsive. Inkstone, check. Ground ink, poured water. Fan-dried paper never folded. Of course, as folds might imply hesitation or fractured thought. You pause. The letter is meant for your elder cousin, to thank him for the medicinal plums he sent. How hard can this be? You start with the salutation. Not dear cousin. No, too casual. Not esteemed elder, which sounds overly formal. Instead, you opt for "to the gentleman whose integrity rises like morning mist above the valley pines." Perfect. You've said hello and also possibly offered him a promotion. The brush must be held correctly, at a 72-degree angle. Exactly 72 degrees. Manuals insist on it. Not vertical, not horizontal, but gently tilted as if suspended between heaven and earth. Too straight. You look stiff. Too slanted. Lazy. There's even a mnemonic about it. Let the brush rise like a pine, tilt like a breeze, and descend like falling plum blossoms, which you forget halfway through writing respected. The tone of your letter must balance deference and dignity. You cannot beg, but you also cannot brag. For example, if you're requesting help securing a new official post, you might say, though I dwell among autumn reeds, I gaze still toward the court's radiant warmth. That's polite Confucian code for I'm available. Please hire me. Historians still argue whether this type of florid indirectness helped avoid offense, or just made everyone extremely tired. Punctuation. There is none. Classical Chinese letters are a waterfall of characters, flowing without commas, periods, or line breaks. Your only guide is rhythm, breath, and poetic instinct. Also, there are rules for how far your first line must begin from the top of the page. 3 finger widths. No more. Any less and your cousin may think you're desperate, or disrespectful, or both. As you continue writing, you remember to include your Chongjing self-deprecating phrase. It's not enough to be polite. You must remind your reader of your own humble status. This pitiful worm dares send a note of thanks is a good start. Or this lowly quill, undeserving of your honor, still aches with gratitude. You're not just a person. You're a moral project in progress, constantly apologizing for existing. Then comes the signature. Not your name. Number. That would be too abrupt. You must include your relationship, your emotional status, and ideally a metaphor or two. Your nephew, who watches the moon through cracked tiles and remembers your kindness, is just barely acceptable. Once finished, you must fold the letter not in half, but in thirds, then rolled and wrapped with a silk thread. Red thread for joy, white for solemnity. You are writing a thank you note for fruit. So pink thread is acceptably dicting respectful affection, but not romantic intentions. One scholar once used golden thread to send a letter of gratitude to his teacher. The teacher returned the letter unread with the note, "This is not a wedding proposal." Even the delivery of the letter is governed by etiquette. You cannot simply hand it off. A servant must deliver it while wearing presentable attire, offering the scroll with 2 hands, eyes lowered. If the recipient is of higher rank, the servant must also recite a brief memorized couplet, a letter-like morning dew brief, but full of virtue. If they forget it, back to the house they go, red-faced and scrollless. And should the recipient respond, etiquette dictates you must wait at least 2 days to read it unless it bears the emergency seal. Why? Because eagerness suggests emotional instability. And remember, Confucianism frowns on anything that hints of personal chaos. You once heard of a young man who opened a reply letter immediately after receiving it. His grandfather reportedly sighed so deeply the wind chime stopped. Some French scholars even taught that you should meditate before reading any letter, to clear your mind of selfish interpretations. A letter, they argued, was not just information, it was an extension of the writer's virtue. To misunderstand it was to misunderstand them. As the ink dries, you feel a quiet satisfaction. The letter is done. It is beautiful. It is unreadable to anyone without 4 years of classical training. You wonder whether your cousin will appreciate the effort, or assume you're trying to impress his wife. Either way, the plums were delicious. You light a small stick of incense. The aroma curls into the corners of the room as you prepare to deliver the scroll. You place it gently into its tube, tie the thread, and leave it near the door for the servant. Tomorrow, it will travel across town like a tiny, dignified diplomat. And you'll start thinking about your next letter. Maybe to your aunt, about the borrowed teapot. Or to your childhood friend, whose calligraphy lately seems a bit rushed. Because in a world built on hierarchy and harmony, the ink never stops flowing. You've bowed correctly. You've tamed your sleeves. You've survived dinner and written a thank you letter poetic enough to make a bamboo grove blush. And now, at last, you might think you can sit down and rest. Not so fast. Because in Confucian etiquette, Even sitting was a delicate art form, a moral performance, a full-body expression of inner virtue. The act of placing your rear end on a surface was, if done wrong, potentially more offensive than misquoting the Analects. It begins with choosing where to sit. And no, you don't just plop down on the nearest cushion. In a formal setting, you're expected to wait until the senior guest takes their seat. Even then, you must approach your mat with caution as if it might explode in disappointment if you hurry. A low bow before seating is polite. Hovering indecisively is safer still. One scroll from the Qing dynasty advises to sit with confidence is to assume too much of heaven's favor. Once you've arrived at your designated cushion or low stool, or polished wooden bench, you face your next trial: how to lower yourself. Too quickly, and you appear reckless. Too slowly, and you risk looking smug. The key is in the knees, bending them at a soft angle, as if submitting to gravity without resistance. Your hands help guide your robes. Your sleeves must not drag. Your behind must not touch the cushion before your intentions do. Historians still argue whether different dynasties enforced different sitting protocols, or if Confucian texts simply offered endless variations on the same punishment by posture. What we know is that seating position signaled everything: your social rank, your emotional state, and even your moral trajectory. The wrong sitting posture could suggest laziness, arrogance, or, worse, Taoist tendencies. The safest and most traditional position. Zheng's wore upright sitting, legs tucked under the thighs, spine erect, arms folded politely over the knees. Try holding this for more than 7 minutes, and your feet begin a slow, humming rebellion. After 15, your toes forget they exist. Still, you must remain composed. Shifting too often is considered impolite. Fidgeting, a moral failure. You once read about a Song dynasty official who remained in Jingzhuo for 3 full hours during a palace exam, all while reciting Confucian verses by heart. He passed with honors, but developed chronic numbness in his left shin, which he politely never mentioned. That's what virtue looks like: quiet suffering with excellent posture. Then there's Panzuo cross-legged sitting, acceptable only in informal settings, often among equals or during meditative discussion. Even then, it must be symmetrical. No flopping one leg over the other like you're lounging by the river. One leg over the other was considered a sign of disdain toward the group, the conversation, and the furniture. Of course, we must not forget Sezwo side sitting. Knees bent, legs tucked to one side. Graceful, feminine, often used by court ladies and scholars during poetry readings. One particularly poetic etiquette text claims this position resembles the swan's bend upon the lake's reflection. It's also a quick way to lose feeling in your hips if done incorrectly. But posture is just one part of the ordeal. Your facial expression matters, too. You must appear alert, but serene, interested, but not overeager. Eyebrows slightly raised show attentiveness. Too high, and you look surprised. Too low, and you appear sullen. A good Confucian sitter must master the eyebrow trianglize. That was a real term used by late Ming portrait artists. The triangle formed by the slope of your brows and the bridge of your nose could suggest everything from wisdom to constipation. Hands. They belong on your lap. Not the table. Not the mat. Not casually resting behind your back like you're sunbathing. Fingers should be lightly intertwined or palms resting atop the knees. Tapping, drumming, or knuckle cracking could, in the wrong setting, be interpreted as spiritual restlessness. One Confucian teacher even had a cane specifically for correcting students who let their thumbs wander during lessons. And what if your leg falls asleep? What if a fly lands on your neck? What if your neighbor sneezes and startles you mid-sentence? These moments are not covered in most manuals. That's the true test of etiquette: what you do when the scrolls run out of advice. You could shift discreetly, pretending to smooth your robes, or offer a silent bow, using the moment as a metaphor for impermanence. Or, as one wise official once did, simply whisper, "The plum tree endures the frost," and resume sitting. Pins and needles be damned. Seating arrangements themselves are an intricate ballet of politics. At a family gathering, elders sit closest to the host's right. In a public meeting, scholars are ranged by exam rank, with those who passed on the first try seated nearer the incense burner. At a poetry club, the guest with the best couplet from last week might be offered a slightly thicker mat. These are subtle rewards, like giving someone a slightly warmer cup of tea and expecting them to understand it as lifelong gratitude. Even among friends, sitting down was not an act to be taken lightly. The host might have carved your name on the back of your stool or left a poem there, in tiny brush strokes. To miss such a detail would be like ignoring a handshake today. It was all about attentiveness, presence, and that ever-elusive harmony between self and setting. Modern scholars debate how seriously these rules were followed by the average person. After all, farmers probably didn't worry about which knee they bent first after a day of harvesting millet. But for scholars, officials, and anyone hoping to move up the social ladder, mastering the art of sitting was as vital as memorizing the Book of Rites. Possibly more. You could misquote a proverb. You could not, under any circumstances, slouch. So, as you lower yourself onto your mat this evening, back straight, hands folded, and breathing slow, you feel the immense gravity of this simple act. You are not just sitting. You are embodying 1,000 years of expectation, all gently pressing down on your spine like ancestral posture coaches. And if you manage to stay still for long enough, you might just glimpse what the sages saw, the dignity of stillness, the virtue in calm, and the quiet heroism of a person who refuses to lean. Your legs are finally numb in a socially acceptable way. Your posture has reached that delicate balance between upright and serene, and you're ready for a moment of peace. But then the teapot arrives, and with it, your next lesson in Confucian etiquette, how to pour tea without accidentally destroying a marriage proposal, insulting 3 ancestors, or setting off a chain of gift obligations that will follow you into your next reincarnation. The teapot is small, elegant, unassuming, dangerous. Because in Confucian ritual, tea is not merely a beverage. It's an event. A coded exchange of status, respect, intention, and sometimes, whether you're allowed to borrow someone's ox. You reach for the pot. Already a mistake. The host must pour first. You withdraw your hand with the speed and shame of someone caught mid-theft. The host smiles. He appreciates your restraint. Or he's amused. It's hard to tell. You bow slightly to the teapot, just in case. The first pour goes to the eldest guest always. Even if they're late, their cup is poured first and left untouched until they arrive. This is known as reserving the breath of virtue. Scholars still debate whether this tradition began as practical hospitality or subtle peer pressure to arrive on time. Either way, the cup sits patiently, steaming. Your turn comes. The host pours from a low angle, holding the lid slightly ajar so the aroma drifts upward. This, according to tea manuals, allows the soul of the leaf to rise and greet you. If your host pours from too high, it implies arrogance. Too low, subservience. The Confucian sweet spot is wrist-level humble, but confident. Much like the tea itself, modest in taste, but profound in afterthought. You bow your head and tap 2 fingers on the table, twisty a gesture meaning thanks and respect. This practice dates to a king emperor who traveled incognito among the people. His servants, unable to bow openly while he poured, developed the tap code as a stealthy substitute. Whether the story is true or simply a delicious fiction passed down by etiquette scholars with a flair for drama, No one agrees, but everyone taps. Now, you must receive the tea. You do not gulp. You do not sip audibly. You hold the cup with both hands, bring it to your lips in one fluid motion, and take a small, reverent mouthful. Not too small. That's insincere. Not too large. That's greedy. You swallow quietly, then offer a soft breath through your nose as if you've just inhaled a memory of springtime. The tea, by the way, is bitter. On purpose. Sweet tea is for children, temples, and those seeking forgiveness. This brewery, smoky, vaguely medicinal, is meant to focus the mind, to remind you of impermanence, to say, yes, you are aging. Yes, you are mortal. Also, don't slouch. The conversation around the tea table is light, metaphorical, indirect. You do not ask questions directly. You do not contradict a guest. You certainly do not correct a quote, even if they misattribute it to lousy when it was clearly Mencius. You nod. You smile. You offer something like, ah, but perhaps the mountain stream knows better, and allow the error to dissolve like mist. Then it's your turn to pour. The host nods to you. Your heart races. You lift the pot. Carefully. Don't let the lid clink. That sound suggests carelessness. You angle the spout. Gently. The goal is to pour an even, silent stream, like moonlight trickling from bamboo. Your first pour must go to your left. Always left to right. Pouring to the right first implies you consider that guest superior to the one on your left, which might be your uncle. And your uncle holds grudges. You offer the cup with two hands, lowering it slightly as you present it. If the recipient doesn't immediately accept it, you wait not anxiously, but as though you've always been in that moment. The space between offer and acceptance is known as the pause of reflection. It's how you say, I value this exchange, without uttering a word. There are fringe variations, too. In certain provinces, pouring clockwise signaled friendship, counterclockwise meant business. And at funerals, the direction was reversed entirely to reflect the turning of fate. You once heard of a tea pourer who used the wrong direction at a birthday feast, and was gently but permanently removed from the guest list. Tea leaves themselves carry meaning. Unfurled leaves suggest openness. Tight spirals, discretion. Jasmine hints at joy. Chrysanthemum, contemplation. Bitter gourd, a polite way to say, you've made poor decisions lately. One Confucian poet even composed entire letters through tea blends sending crushed hibiscus, dried tangerine peel, and a single lotus seed to express sorrow, patience, and rebirth. His cousin never forgave him. Back at the table, the tea cools. That's your cue. You lift your cup again, nod once more, and take another sip. Still bitter. Still perfect. You're not just drinking. You're participating in a centuries-old ritual of pause, presence, and posture. Modern scholars debate how much of this tea drama was truly followed by average citizens. Many likely just brewed leaves and drank quietly. But in elite circles, especially among scholars, the tea ceremony became a miniature performance of virtue, a moment where stillness became eloquence. As you pour the final round, the host speaks. The tea is humble, but the company is rich. You bow your head, not too low. Your sleeves drift gently over your knees. You rest your cup. The leaves have settled. The evening, too. You're feeling pretty good now. Your tea didn't spill. Your sleeves behaved, and no one accused you of spiritual impropriety. But the moment you opened your mouth to speak, you remember, in Confucian etiquette, even talking is a potential minefield. Not the usual kind, where you say something dumb and regret it later. number. In this world, how you speak, what you say, and especially what you avoid saying all play into the vast and intricate theater of virtue. This is not small talk. This is ritualized verbal ballet. You begin your sentence. You want to compliment your host's garden. But do you say your chrysanthemums are blooming beautifully? Absolutely not. That would be far too blunt. Instead, you must employ metaphor. Ideally, something classical. Something with a reference to nature, poetry, and at least one dynastic allusion. You try. The autumn sun does well to remember its gentleness in your courtyard. The host nods. Success. The others smile slightly. This is the ancient art of Huasi-elevated speech, where literal meaning is discouraged, and everyone agrees to swim together in a warm sea of implication. In Confucian discourse, metaphor wasn't just flowery, it was required. Speaking plainly was considered a symptom of poor education or, worse, poor moral refinement. To say I'm happy would be like showing up to a banquet in short pants. You're supposed to say, even the bamboo seems to laugh in this shade. Still, there were rules. You mustn't overdo it. Too many metaphors, and you risk sounding insincere or theatrical. Balance, as always, is key. Confucius himself warned against clothing words in excess silk. One 14th century etiquette scroll describes the ideal sentence as a reed boat floating between clarity and mist. So, basically, be poetic, but not too poetic. You decide to contribute to the conversation, now turning toward public service. A guest mentions a local tax issue. You might say, the river overflows when its banks are burdened. That's the polite way of saying, the system's flawed. You've made your point without starting a fight. Congratulations. You're still invited to dinner. But speaking is only half the challenge. Listening, in Confucian etiquette, is its own discipline. You nod not too fast, not too often. You maintain eye contact, but allow it to drift respectfully when someone references an elder or a sacred text. One etiquette guide instructs that the ideal listener holds silence like a teacup, steady, attentive, and never trembling. You must never interrupt, not even with agreement. If you must interject, do so with a proverb. Something like, as the old farmers say, even a dry seed remembers the spring. Then proceed, gently, humbly, and always defer back to the previous speaker before concluding. Your voice, you remind yourself, is not your own, it's merely a flute through which harmony plays. Historians still argue whether people actually spoke like this in daily life, or whether this stylized metaphor talk was confined to court rituals and scholarly salons. Some claim villagers and traders had their own coded versions using farming idioms and weather talk to express deeper truths. Others insist only the elite mastered the full Confucian vocabulary of indirectness. And then there's the matter of volume. A gentleman's voice, according to most etiquette scrolls, should hover just above a whisper, especially indoors. Loudness was associated with lack of control. A whisper, on the other hand, was a sign of internal strength. Let the wind carry your thought. One King-era manual says, so you speak softly, letting your words ride the stillness like dragonflies. There are forbidden topics. 2. Illness, unless metaphorical. Money, unless using poetic euphemisms. Romance, unless referencing ancient love poems involving cranes or longing gazes across a peach orchard. Politics, only if disguised in the language of weather. It seems storms gather in the eastern courts. You might say, nodding gravely. Everyone will understand. No one will say more. When making a request, your phrasing must contain 3 layers of humility, preemptive apology, indirect suggestion, and a compliment wrapped inside the ask. If you want to borrow your neighbor's horse, you might say, I have long admired your steed's composure, a creature born of discipline. Should it ever wish to stretch its legs upon the western path, I would be honored to accompany it. And if you're refusing a request, even more delicate, a direct no is rarely acceptable. You must imply inability, express sorrow, and suggest an alternative. Alas, the wind carries me elsewhere these days. But perhaps the temple ox might bear that weight with more grace than I. You've said no. You've also recommended an ox. That's multitasking. Your host chuckles softly at your latest contribution. He quotes a Tang poem in response. You laugh it too loudly and respond with a line of your own. This back and forth could go on for hours. It's like fencing with ink and feathers. No one wins. That's the point. The conversation drifts to philosophical questions. What makes a man just? When is ambition virtuous? How much silence is too much? You don't answer directly. No one does. But your pause, your quiet sigh, your nod at the night window of it speaks volumes. And so the evening rolls on, soft words weaving through candlelight. You've spoken of nothing and everything. The guests begin to rise. Parting words are exchanged, once more wrapped in metaphors. May your path tomorrow be shaded, but not clouded, someone says to you. You bow. And may your tea remember the sun. You reply. You return home, your voice tired from whispering virtue all night long. But your words, folded like paper cranes, have found their place in the air. You've said very little. You've said it all. The morning comes, soft and gray, and you're summoned once again to a tea salon or poetry circle this time, but to something more terrifying, a government office. And not just any office. A bureaucratic office in a Confucian society, where paperwork is sacred, hierarchy is etched into the furniture, and most importantly, your walking posture may be evaluated just as closely as your written reports. As you approach the large, red-painted building, its eaves curling like a scholar's sleeve mid-bow, you steady your breath. Behind you, your sandals slap the stone path softly. Maybe. You slow down slightly. Not too much. You don't want to appear reluctant. But haste is worse. In Confucian etiquette, walking too quickly into a formal space suggests recklessness. Worse still, ambition. And ambition, when visible, becomes arrogance. So, you adopt the pace recommended by etiquette manuals, measured, deliberate, silent. Your feet land heel first, rolling forward like waves against a polished rock. You're not walking to get somewhere. You're walking to prove you belong somewhere. A Confucian gait should say, I trust in virtue. Also, I'm not late. According to a Han-era etiquette guide titled The Gentleman's Passage, walking posture was part of Shenfei's physical projection of moral character. Upright spine, shoulders relaxed but not slumped, chin level, arms close to the body. You must resemble a pine tree strolling with purpose. Not a crane. Not a willow. Certainly not a squirrel. You reach the threshold. You always pause. Then, step over with your left foot first. Left to right. Always. It mirrors the sunrise. Then offer a shallow nod to the hall's guardian spirit, which resides somewhere between the third tile and the inkstand. No one tells you this explicitly, but everyone knows. Inside, you find a long corridor, flanked by pillars. Other scholars pass you, each performing the same choreography, slow steps, turned shoulders to avoid eye contact, gentle coughs to signal presence. No one hurries. The records clerk with the broken sandal still limps with studied grace. The elderly tax examiner behind you makes more noise adjusting his robes than stepping forward. It's all part of the silent code. You reach your assigned desk. It's plain, polished wood, modest grain. No carving stoves are reserved for magistrates. You nod once before sitting, acknowledging both the desk's symbolic weight and the labor that went into carving its joints. Then you seat yourself just so, neither too quickly nor with excessive ceremony. After all, everyone's watching, and no one appears to be watching. Then comes the walk to deliver your scroll. A simple 10-meter trip across the tiled floor. But every motion matters. You must hold the document in both hands, horizontally, with fingers equidistant from the edges, palms turned slightly up, like offering a gift to heaven. The scroll itself is not to be clutched or dangled. It is to be presented your virtue, bound in bamboo slats and twine. You begin walking. One step, then another. Left foot, right foot. Your arms must remain level. The scroll must not wobble. There is no official rule about scroll wobble, but you once saw a prefect frown deeply when a young intern's delivery was accompanied by a faint rhythmic bounce. That intern now catalogs stone weights in a border town. Historians still debate whether walking etiquette in administrative spaces evolved from palace rituals or was inspired by military formations. Some suggest it was meant to prevent chaos in busy halls. Others argue it was yet another performance of the Confucian ideal, order reflected in movement. You pass a superior. You pause. Lower your head slightly. Adjust your scroll by one finger width downward. This is not a bow, but a gesture of respect. He nods barely and continues. You exhale silently. Of course, there were fringe styles too. The 6-step greeting, used mostly in imperial visits, involved pausing every 3 steps to offer a brief glance upward. One unlucky advisor performed this incorrectly during a royal inspection, paused on the 4th step. Technically a cosmic misalignment. He was reassigned to the Ministry of Salt. But there are practical implications to walking etiquette as well. One Confucian proverb warns, a man who walks too fast walks alone. That is, social harmony depends on calibrated pacing. If you arrive too early, you disrupt the balance. Too late, and you erode trust. The ideal is to arrive together both physically and morally. You reach the magistrate's platform. You bow just the head and offer the scroll. He accepts it without looking, which is the most respectful response. To read it immediately would suggest distrust, or worse, anticipation. He places it beside him. You bow once more, step back, and return to your desk with the same measured grace. As you sit again, your sandals tucked neatly beneath your stool, you feel a strange sense of accomplishment. You've walked correctly. You've moved with dignity. And more importantly, you've avoided all the micro missteps that could lead to quiet ridicule, unspoken gossip, or, in extreme cases, having your name left off the New Year calligraphy scrolls. Later that day, your friend enters the office late. He rushes in, robes flapping, scroll in one hand, hair slightly unpinned. He's apologetic, breathless. The magistrate doesn't even glance up. There is no scolding, just a silence so vast it echoes louder than 1,000 chimes. That night, your friend dines alone. Modern experts debate how deeply these walking rituals were ingrained in everyday citizens. In crowded markets and muddy farms, surely people moved more freely. But within administrative buildings, temples, and scholarly halls, the walk was a performance. A slow, quiet, careful ballet. Each step said, I belong. I am calm. I am not here to disrupt heaven's balance. So when you rise to leave, you do so without haste. You roll your scrolls, fold your sleeves, and take one final, perfect step. The floor welcomes you. The walls remain undisturbed. And your virtue, you hope, has walked just far enough ahead of you to leave a good impression. The world slows under a veil of incense and low drums. You've managed to walk with virtue, talk like a bamboo in the wind, and pour tea without instigating civil unrest. But now, you face one of the most emotionally charged events in the Confucian calendar, a funeral. And not just any funeral. A full, multi-day, meticulously ritualized Confucian funeral with over 300 guidelines, where how loudly you weep, how many times you bow, and how you fold your hands can echo for generations. So you tie your sash tighter, steel your posture, and step into the courtyard of mourning with all the solemnity of someone entering a job interview. With the dead, the smell of burning sandalwood curls into your sleeves as you approach the ancestral altar. Your mind, meanwhile, spins with questions like, is my robe dark enough? Did I remember the third morning knot? What if my sob sounds too nasal? Funeral etiquette in Confucian society was more than a performance of grief. It was a demonstration of your moral character, your family's honor, and your understanding of the cosmic balance between life and death. You weren't just mourning, you were restoring order. Improper mourning was believed to offend the ancestors and could result in misfortune, public disgrace, or at minimum, the silent judgment of your third aunt. You kneel, not abruptly. Kneeling too quickly shows impulsiveness. Too slowly suggests you are performing. The correct descent is smooth, silent, and segmented like a folding fan closing in reverence. Your knees land on the prepared straw mat, not 1 inch to the left or right. Some traditions even included chalk outlines to help mourners hit their marks. Your head bows 3 times called Sankuth triple kowtow. First for the body, then for the soul, and finally for the lineage. If your second bow lingers longer than the first, you may be accused of neglecting the living family in favor of sentimentality. If the third bow is too fast, you risk disrespecting the ancestral line. It's a choreography of sorrow, and every heartbeat counts. Then comes the wailing. You've rehearsed this. Yes, rehearsed. Because in elite families, mourners were sometimes trained in how to weep correctly. Too quiet, and you seem cold. Too loud, and you draw attention away from the deceased. The ideal cry is a trembling exhale, punctuated with occasional sobs, timed with the drumbeats. The sound should rise and fall like a distant storm. One etiquette manual describes it as a river of grief winding through a bamboo forest. You do your best, but you're hoarse by the second verse of the funeral dirge. Historians still argue whether these mourning standards were applied universally, or only among the gentry. It's likely that farmers cried how they wanted and no one minded. But in Confucian scholar families, the act of grief was part moral duty, part social script. One Qing dynasty record even tells of a man reprimanded for grieving asymmetrically, a reference to his uneven sleeve motion during bowing. And then there's the clothing. You wear undyed hemp, tied at the waist with rockcord. No silk, no color, no buttons. Everything must look coarse, unfinished, humble, symbolic of life interrupted. Even the shoes are plain, with rope soles and fraying edges. If you look comfortable, you're doing it wrong. Depending on your relationship to the deceased, you may also wear a mourning hat, a stiff cone of reed or bamboo, the shape and tilt of which signal your familial rank. An eldest son's hat tilts slightly forward toward responsibility. A younger cousin's tilts back toward deference. There are diagrams for this, and elders will consult them like engineers reviewing blueprints. The rituals continue: incense offerings, formal chants, repeated prostrations. Each movement, each phrase, is calculated to express the proper depth of loss without descending into disorder. Even the food offerings must follow pattern: no spicy dishes, no strong aromas, and always presented in odd numbers, to reflect the imbalance of a life cut short. You notice a relative across the courtyard drop to his knees too quickly and accidentally knock over a bowl of steamed rice. No one says a word, but the silence is thunderous. Later, during the condolence meal, he will apologize with a full verse poem and a special tray of lotus-wrapped dumplings. You make a mental note, never underestimate the social weight of rice. Then comes the morning walk. A slow procession from the home altar to the burial site or memorial tower. Each mourner takes precisely 7 steps, then pauses for breath. 7 more. Each pause symbolizes the soul's transition through stages of detachment. Your knees ache. Your feet blister. But your posture remains tall. You are grief on legs, choreographed to perfection. The burial itself is a quiet flurry of gestures, the placing of dirt, the pouring of wine, the final bow. At no point should your gaze fall directly on the face of the deceased unless invited by the priest or eldest son. Even grief has hierarchy. Even loss demands composure. A brief moment allows for private reflection. You retreat to a shaded corner. A younger cousin asks you how you're holding up. You respond. The willow bends, but does not break. He nods, places a stone by the grave, and says nothing more. That's enough. You've spoken volumes. Modern scholars debate whether these mourning rituals were performative or genuinely cathartic. Some say they gave structure to chaos. Others argue they suppressed real emotion beneath layers of duty. But perhaps both are true. In Confucian thought, the form doesn't mask the feeling, it channels it. The ritual is the vessel. Your sorrow is the tea. As the ceremony concludes, you join the condolence meal. Quiet conversation, bland food, thoughtful glances. No laughter, no storytelling aid. That comes on the 7th day, when mourning begins to shift into memory. For now, the silence says it all. You return home, your robes dusted with incense ash, your throat raw from silent cries. You bow to the ancestral altar once more before retiring. The candles flicker, and the air smells of chrysanthemum. Today, you did not just grieve. You grieved correctly. And in doing so, you honored not just the dead, but the living, the unborn, and the order that holds all three together. There are many things that keep a Confucian up at night: misfiled scrolls, an unevenly folded robe, the fear of laughing too loudly at a plum blossom joke, but none compares to the quiet dread of a banquet seating chart. You've been invited to another gathering, a celebration, this time an appointment, perhaps, or a child's full moon ceremony. There will be wine, poetry, music, and delicately pan-fried lotus root. But before any of that, there is the game of chairs. And in this particular game, no one wins Severion simply tries not to lose face. You arrive fashionably neutral, not too early, which reeks of desperation, not too late, which reeks of arrogance. The host greets you with practiced warmth. Then, with the gravitas of a high priest consulting the stars, gestures toward your seat. Now the drama begins. In Confucian seating, the seat of honor is always the north-facing spot, farthest from the door, facing inward. This seat is for the most senior guest, or the most honored. From there, the social value of each seat radiates outward and downward in a complex pattern of relationships. Age, merit, birth order, and whether your uncle once saved the magistrate's cousin from a runaway ox. You are placed fourth from the left, an ambiguous rank, respectable, but not elite. Is it because you're young? Or because last time you overcomplimented the wine? You smile, bow, and say nothing. Inside, you run through possible offenses like a gambler counting dice. You sightly when your host does, of course, and you adjust your sleeves. Again, your elbows must not invade another's airspace. Your knees must remain symmetrical. The folding of the napkin on your lap is, at this point, basically origami. To your right is an older gentleman from the calligraphy bureau. He has a mole on his chin and a habit of clearing his throat before quoting Confucius. He outranks you socially, but not technically. This means you must defer slightly, but not so much that you appear servile. If he offers you food, you must accept. But you must also offer it back once, and only once, before eating. If you offer twice, you're mocking his generosity. If you decline entirely, you're challenging his status. Simple. To your left is a cousin of the host. Young, ambitious, wearing a robe just slightly too embroidered for someone of his exam results. He bows to you at a slightly lower angle than expected. Interesting. Possibly a subtle dig. Possibly just a tight sash. Food arrives. First the ceremonial rice, then the pickled lotus, then an unidentifiable jellyfish thing that you smile at as if you've always loved jellyfish. As the host raises his cup, everyone follows. The first toast is to harmony. The second, to ancestors. The third, to the virtue of shared understanding, an intentionally vague phrase that allows everyone to drink, without risk of accidental political alignment. You clink glasses but gently. Never higher than someone of higher rank. Never with too much enthusiasm. One guest across the table bumps his glass with such force that the rice wine splashes. His neighbor raises an eyebrow. That man, you suspect, will be forgotten when poetry is passed around later. And yes, there will be poetry. But not yet. First, there's the matter of strategic gift presentation. A scholar at the far end rises, holding a scroll. He offers it to the host. The host feigns surprise, then acceptance, then humility. The gift is opened, examined with gratitude, and then subtly placed beside his right elbow. Not left. Never left. That's reserved for dishes one dislikes. When your turn comes, because of course you brought a gift, you wait for the right moment. The host glances your way. You bow slightly. Produce a small package, a carved inkstone wrapped in silk. You don't describe its quality. You simply say, a stone to reflect clear thought. That's it. Modest. Metaphorical. Perfectly forgettable. Perfect. Modern scholars still argue whether these seating anxieties were as paralyzing as they sound. Perhaps, they suggest, most people simply went along, adjusted, and didn't obsess over exact stool positioning. But if that were true, then why do so many Confucian texts have entire chapters devoted to banquet seating strategy? One surviving manual from the late Ming Dynasty includes a table map, literally, a seating blueprint complete with annotations like uncle's widow's son, seat 6, but offers seat 4 if he arrives early. There are footnotes about exceptions for poets, monks, and visiting inspectors. The only thing missing is a command line interface. The meal continues. A small musician's troupe begins to play a gentle piece on bamboo flute and zither. The table relaxes. People lean into their conversations. A guest tells a light story about a goose who mistook a Confucian scholar's shoes for another goose. Laughter ripples round the table. You chuckle apologically. Not first. Not loudest. Just present. Finally, poetry is passed around. Guests take turns reciting verses. Yours is short and safe. Tea cools as moonlight fades. Beneath the plum, I find my place. A few nods. One soft clap. You've contributed, but not dominated. You are the fourth seat from the left, and you have earned it. As guests rise to leave, each bows to the host, offering parting compliments that sound poetic but are, in truth, carefully measured summaries of the evening's power dynamics. May your courtyard remain quiet and your scrolls uncracked, says one. May your rice never harden, says another. You opt for, may your seating always reflect wisdom, The host smiles. Success. You walk home under the stars, wondering whether you'll be moved up one seat next time. Not too quickly, of course. That would seem ambitious. But maybe, with a little more restraint, a little more patience, and a slightly better inkstone, you'll drift one spot closer to the north wall. And until then, you'll practice how to sit in silence. Because in Confucian society, even stillness moves. The sun rises gently through the paper windows, casting long beams across your sleeping mat. And you rise stiff, deliberate, and already thinking about your hair. Because today, like every day in a Confucian household, begins with the morning hair ritual. A sequence of grooming tasks so detailed it might make a modern spa menu blush. This is no vanity project. In Confucian thought, the hair on your head is not just keratin, it's a gift from your parents. A thread in the cosmic tapestry. A living emblem of your filial piety. Cutting it is an offense. Neglecting it is disgrace. So, every morning, your grooming routine is a devotional act. A symbolic thank you note written in comb strokes. You begin with warm water, gently infused with chrysanthemum. Not too hot heat implies haste. Too cold and you risk a sneeze during the ritual, which can break the flow of sincerity. One etiquette manual from the Tang dynasty even suggests lukewarm as spring fog, which, while poetic, gives you no practical guidance whatsoever. You splash your face, inhale, and reach for the comb. Ah, the comb. Yours is carved from sandalwood, smooth-edged, and slightly curved. The ideal comb should reflect your character, unbroken, humble, functional, with just a hint of refinement. Some wealthy scholars decorated theirs with poems burned into the spine, which sounds lovely until you realize you have to memorize those verses, lest you appear like someone who owns moral literature but doesn't live by it. The combing begins. According to ritual, you must pass it through your hair exactly 100 times. No more, no less. Each stroke is symbolic. The first 10 awaken clarity. The next 20 restore breath. Then 30 for memory. 20 for humility. And the final 20 as a silent offering to your ancestors. If your hand slips, you must start again. Historians still debate whether this was taken literally. Some argue that many merely approximated the count. But some strict Confucians tracked every stroke, often using a prayer bead in their free hand, like a quiet metronome of virtue. You part your hair precisely down the center. Symmetry is harmony. The crooked part implies a crooked heart. Then comes the oiling, a few drops of sesame or camellia oil, gently rubbed through the scalp. You apply it not with fingers too coarse but with a soft cloth, folding it like an envelope of moonlight. If the oil drips, you've overdone it. If your hair is still dry to the touch, you're ungrateful. There is no winning. There is only balance. You tie your hair into a top knot. Slowly. With intention. This is your daily declaration of adulthood, of discipline, of social participation. In some periods, scholars even layered multiple hair loops to reflect seniority, exam scores, or poetic rank. One eccentric official was said to have braided his hair into the character for endurance. He was widely respected and mostly avoided. For formal occasions, you insert a hairpin wood, bone, or, if you're lucky, polished jade. But even hairpins have codes. A phoenix motif, too showy for breakfast. A plum blossom, acceptable if recited alongside a relevant poem. One Confucian widow was praised for her yearly pin of black lacquer, modest, elegant, mourning appropriate. Her neighbors copied the look so often that it became known as the silent willow. Of course, these grooming rituals weren't just for men. Women in Confucian households followed similarly detailed routines, often more elaborate. Mothers taught daughters not just how to braid, but loop a lesson in family structure, virtue, and self-restraint. Some even wrote odes to their combs. One, preserved in a Song Dynasty scroll, reads, "Morning wood, thou dost untangle not the strands, but pride and sorrow." You admire your reflection in the polished brass mirror, not for beauty, but for alignment. Your hair is centered. You're not firm. You're pin-seated. You are, for now, composed. But there's one final step. You bow to the mirror. Yes, you bow. Not to your face, but to the virtue it is meant to reflect. One Confucian manual states, "Let the face be a map of discipline, the scalp a scroll of gratitude." You lower your gaze, not in vanity, but in affirmation. Now, you dress. Sleeves first, then sash, then shoesagan aligned. You cross your arms briefly, imagining how your silhouette will appear to others throughout the day. One elderly teacher once told you, "The world knows your mind by your hairline and hem." You thought it was a joke. It was not. You step outside, nod to the house shrine, and begin your day. Modern scholars often question the rigidity of these grooming expectations. Surely, they say, not every scholar combed 100 times, or bowed to a mirror, or composed haikus about sesame oil. But even if some rituals were exaggerated, the intent remained daily discipline as a form of reverence. In the Confucian world, self-care was not indulgence. It was structure, devotion, and order. And as your sandals tap the stone path, your hair pinned and perfect, you carry that structure with you, quietly declaring, in every combed strand, that today, you begin again with dignity. By mid-afternoon, your posture remains straight, your top knot is holding strong, and your tea intake has reached precisely the number of cups required to maintain social attentiveness without needing a break. You're not allowed to excuse yourself for. But then it happens. Someone disagrees with you. Not aggressively, of course. This is Confucian society. No one yells across the hall or slams a bamboo scroll in dramatic defiance. The disagreement comes in the form of a smile. A very polite, possibly condescending, possibly accidental smile. And a response like a worthy thought. And yet, how curious that Mencius would phrase it otherwise. You have entered the battlefield of polite disagreement. And in Confucian etiquette, this means one thing: you must now lose the argument as gracefully as possible. To be clear, argument isn't forbidden, but it's structured, tidy, curved at the edges like a calligrapher's flourish. And most importantly, it's not about winning. It's about preserving harmony, maintaining dignity, and suggesting correction in the most indirect, cushion-wrapped, metaphor-laden way imaginable. You begin your rebuttal carefully. You don't say, "I disagree." You say, "I wonder if, like the fishermen facing two rivers, we may find another channel." This buys you time. It also immediately hands your opponent the moral high ground, which you will attempt to borrow just briefly. Etiquette dictates 3 layers of rhetorical fog. Deference before dissent, begin by complimenting the other's point. Metaphor as mask, deliver your counterpoint through parable, poem, or nature imagery. Reverence upon retreat, even if you land a subtle logic blow. End with a phrase like, "But I am still learning." Of course. You do all 3. You say, "Your reading of Mencius reminds me of the bamboo that bends before the snout, questionably rooted." And yet, might we also consider the plum, which blossoms while the ground is still hard? The room nods. The scholar across from you raises one eyebrow. That's the Confucian equivalent of a dual challenge. He responds with a line about frost and virtue. You both sip your tea. A minor official chuckles too early. Everyone ignores him. This goes on for 3 more rounds. Nobody raises a voice. Nobody quotes anything newer than the Tang Dynasty. But the tension is delicious, like fermented bean paste hidden in a mooncake. Eventually, you bow your head slightly and say, and in such matters, as the stream yields to stone, I yield to better insight. You've withdrawn, but only just. You've preserved your dignity. And he nods with magnanimous self-restraint. No one wins. The banquet continues. Historians still debate how common these subtle battles of wit were. Some argue that most citizens had neither the time nor the metaphors. Others insist that in Confucian households, disagreement itself became an art form designed to sharpen the mind without drawing blood. One famous case involved 2 brothers in the late Song dynasty who argued for 17 years about whether the family altar should face northeast or due east. They wrote over 200 letters, each phrased with the utmost humility and veiled snark. When one finally conceded, he ended with, "May the compass never need apology again." Disagreements were also handled differently depending on rank. A junior official could only disagree upward if they included a classic citation and a relevant ancestor's name. Example, as my late uncle once reflected while studying the great learning, the heavens do not move hastily. Translation, you're being impulsive, sir. And if you were debating with someone clearly wrong, you still couldn't say so. The strategy was to ask questions. Might it be that we have mistaken this verse for another? Or the more advanced, would not the peach orchard, in its eagerness to bloom, forget the frost still in the roots? This sounds poetic. It also means, please slow down and stop embarrassing yourself. Fringe etiquette scrolls even cataloged body language cues for disagreeing politely. Tapping your scroll twice meant intriguing. Stroking your beard counterclockwise meant I would like to counterpoint gently. And turning your fan inward could be read as I've prepared 3 couplets and a logic trap. So proceed carefully. Of course, all of this presumes a controlled environmentia houses, courtyards, ink-stained lecture rooms. If you were arguing with your older sister over whether to boil or steam the dumplings, the rules became more flexible. But still, even domestic disagreements often followed ritualized language. Instead of "you're wrong," one might say, "Shall we ask the calendar what it thinks of boiling today?" Eventually, all Confucian disagreements were resolved or simply paused ended the same way, with a shared proverb, a bow, and a change of subject, often towards something less volatile, like weather or moon cycles. You leave the discussion with your pride mostly intact and your teacup now empty. The room feels lighter. The scholar who beat you now quotes you to another guest, perhaps out of guilt. You nod and smile. No winner. No loser. Just a well-executed game of mutual deflection. As you walk home, you consider the gentle war of words that filled the last hour. You remember every metaphor, every eyebrow twitch, every pivot back to virtue, and you feel not defeated, but refined, sharpened, calmer. Because in Confucian thought, even disagreement is part of a harmony. Like wind through pine, it can shake the branches without breaking the tree. You've successfully maneuvered through polite intellectual combat, served tea without social collapse, and honored your ancestors with a weep just dramatic enough. At this point, you feel prepared for anything. But then someone offers you a gift. And just like that, your stomach drops. Because in Confucian etiquette, receiving a gift isn't a moment of joy. It's a performance. A slow-motion negotiation between gratitude, humility, and the crushing fear that you'll accept too fast, too slow, or with the wrong hand gesture and accidentally insult someone's great-great-grandmother. It starts innocently enough. Your colleague smiles and produces a small bundle silk-wrapped, tied with twine, carried in both hands with visible care. You immediately break into a sweat. You must refuse it. 3 times. Ideally. That's the standard. If you accept it right away, you seem greedy. But if you refuse too firmly, you risk rejecting the sentiment behind the gift. It's not about the object. It's about acknowledging the gesture without implying attachment to possessions. Yes, it's exhausting. Your first refusal is verbal. I dare not accept such generosity. Polite. Measured. Expected. Your colleague insists. The second refusal comes with a gesture. You raise your hands and step slightly back. Truly, I am unworthy. This time, you add a soft laugh to make it seem less dramatic. The third refusal is the trickiest. It must sound sincere while leaving the door open for final acceptance. You say, "This is too great a kindness. I would feel guilty to keep such thoughtfulness." It's a masterstroke. You've refused it without refusing it. He presses it into your hands. Now, acceptance. You receive the gift with both hands, slightly bowed posture, and eyes lowered. You do not look directly at the gift. That implies material interest. You admire the gesture, not the item. Then comes the next challenge, the gratitude expression. You must never say, "Thank you" plainly. Instead, you offer something poetic and vague like, "To receive such thought is to carry spring in the pocket." Or, "The heart remembers the fragrance, not the petals." Bonus points if you reference the weather. You wait until your colleague leaves before you so much as glance at the bundle. And when you do, you unwrap it carefully slow, even if it's just dried fruit. In Confucian society, speed equals rudeness. You must savor the meaning, not devour the contents. But your anxiety doesn't end there. Because now that you've received a gift, you've triggered the great cycle of Confucian reciprocity. You must give something back. Not immediately, of course. That would look desperate. You must wait an appropriate span of 7 days, or a full moon cycling, then respond with a gift of slightly lesser value. Why lesser? Because to match or exceed the original gift implies a desire to one-up the giver, which insults their humility. A gift too small, on the other hand, suggests disregard. You are now playing the game of gratitude arithmetic. Scholars still debate whether people truly followed this 3-refusal model in everyday life. Some suggest it was reserved for formal exchanges between scholars and officials. Others argue it bled into everything from birthday buns to borrowed umbrellas. One Song Dynasty diary tells of a scholar who refused a gourd ladle 8 times, only to eventually accept it with a bow so deep he injured his hip. He then spent 2 weeks composing a thank you scroll in verse. There were also dangerous gifts. Anything too lavish could be seen as a bribe. One had to watch for signs, gold ornaments, rare jade, or anything accompanied by phrases like "a small token" for your influence were immediate red flags. One etiquette guide advises, when the gift glows more than the lantern, let silence protect your name. Let's not forget symbolic gifts. A fan in summer suggests thoughtfulness. A fan in winter might imply you think someone is sweating over something like guilt. A peach. That's longevity. A pear. Separation. Which is awkward when the two grow on the same tree. You must check for hidden meanings the way a detective checks footprints carefully, repeatedly, and always with suspicion. Occasion matters. 2. A gift on your birthday must be received with reference to your parents, not yourself. "I accept this with thanks for those who gave me breath," is a standard line. Gifts at a funeral, received with silence, and later burned if too flashy. A gift given before an exam, dangerous. That's exam luck poisoning. And if you fail afterward, Everyone will know who jinxed you. And of course, the presentation method. Never hand a gift directly across a table. That's transactional. Always rise, step forward, and present it while standing. Some regions even had gift stools, small platforms where the object was placed so the recipient could approach it without physical contact. That way, the focus remained on the meaning of the item or the giver. You remember once giving your aunt a jar of preserved plum blossoms. You'd wrapped it modestly, bowed 3 times, and spoken a short poem. She accepted it on the 4th refusal, smiled, and said, "May the blossoms remind us of patience." Then she didn't speak to you for a week. You later learned that plum blossoms were her late husband's favorite. The memory was too sharp. The lesson, intention is not an autumning is everything. As the day ends, you return home, the gift still wrapped and resting on your scroll table. You'll open it quietly, perhaps with incense burning. You'll compose a few lines to express your appreciation. And then, in a week or so, you'll prepare your return gift. Something humble, something thoughtful, something that won't imply your cousin's embroidery lacks discipline. In a world built on balance and reverence, the act of giving and receiving becomes a sacred exchange, not of things, but of virtue disguised as gesture. And in that exchange, the soul is revealed wrapped in silk, offered with both hands, and accepted with a bow. Evening falls again, and just when you think the day can fade into a simple bowl of millet porridge and a few gentle flute notes from your neighbor's courtyard, your grandmother catches you at the door and stares directly at your robe. "You're wearing linen," she says flatly, "and it's only the 9th day before the solstice." You freeze. Your mind spins through every calendar fragment and lunar calculation. She's right. You switch to linen a week too early. And in Confucian etiquette, this is not merely a fashion fox pass, it is a moral lapse. Because even your wardrobe is a reflection of your character, your sense of timing, and let's face it, how much you truly respect seasonal balance. In other words, Confucianism doesn't stop at the teacup or the bow. It climbs into your closet, peers critically at your seams, and demands that your sleeve weight match the current phase of the moon. Let's back up. Confucian attire followed strict seasonal codes, not just based on weather, but on cosmic cycles. To wear silk in spring suggested renewal. To wear hemp in mourning indicated spiritual discipline. To change to lighter robes before the appointed festival was considered a sign of impatience, even vanity. And in a society where patience was practically currency, you've just shorted the market. The prescribed clothing change for summer is typically marked by a formal day known as e.g., or clothing transition day, determined by a combination of solar term and family consensus. Get it wrong, and you risk more than cold shoulder shy risk whispered commentary from the aunt circle. One famous anecdote tells of a promising young clerk who wore a short-sleeved robe 2 days early and was denied promotion for lack of calendar alignment. You quickly change, back into cotton. Heavier, a bit itchy, but appropriate. You mumble a poem to your ancestors about clouds and humility and pray no one else noticed. But seasonal dress etiquette goes deeper. There's the question of fabric hierarchy. Silk, elegant, but must be subdued in tone. No peacock patterns unless you're attending a wedding or an imperial poetry reading. Cotton, practical, acceptable year-round, especially in scholarly households. Linen, reserved for late spring and early summer but only after the grain in your solar marker. Hemp, mourning only. Wearing hemp without a death in the family is like arriving to a celebration, holding a funeral banner. And then there are the colors. Each season carried an expected palette. Spring, soft greens and browns. Summer, light blues, gentle ivory. Autumn, rust, deep gray. Winter, black, deep indigo, or undyed hues. A Confucian gentleman in bright red during a quiet autumn tea meeting would be the equivalent of blasting drums in a meditation hall. Subtlety was the measure of taste. Restraint, the badge of virtue. You once heard of a widow who wore pale lilac trim during late morning, rather than the prescribed ash gray. Her neighbors interpreted it as a declaration of readiness to remarry. A scroll of concern was sent. 2 years later, she did marry again. The scroll had been correct. Seasonal accessories mattered too. In spring, light sashes of soft gauze. In summer, fancilways hand-painted, never factory-made. In winter, collars lined with rabbit fur or imitation rabbit fur if you were particularly ascetic. Socks had stitching rules. You once watched your uncle pick out a pair, with all the seriousness of selecting a minister of finance. Some etiquette texts even offered guidance for how your robe should sound. Yes, sound. In summer, it should rustle like distant lavesh just enough to suggest motion, not enough to distract. A noisy robe was the mark of either cheap stitching or personal arrogance. You have since trained your sleeves to whisper. Historians debate how universally these seasonal rules were enforced. While elite households had the luxury to change wardrobes quarterly, commoners often made do with a layered robe strategizing or adding garments based on temperature, and hoping no one asked too many questions. But even then, people noticed. If not the fabric, then the attitude of the fabric. There's even a legend of a Confucian sage who wore the same unlined robe year-round. When questioned, he responded, "He who aligns with the Tao need not align with linen." Most scholars believe this was a clever excuse for not doing laundry. As the evening cools, you finally settle into your corrected outfit, mid-weight cotton, modest hem, dusk blue sash. Your grandmother nods as you pass. Forgiveness granted. You light the oil lamp. The robe folds neatly as you sit. No creases. No noise. Just the quiet sound of someone trying very hard to be seasonally invisible. And now the day slows. You fold your hands. You bow to the house altar. You sip your night tea and let the fireflies carry your last thoughts into the courtyard. You've done well. Not perfectly, but well. You've navigated bows, sleeves, funerals, disagreements, gifts, and now, your own closet. And through it all, you've upheld not just ritual, but the invisible harmony that Confucian etiquette promises to protect, a life lived carefully, respectfully, with grace in even the smallest things. And now, you sleep. The night is deep now, quiet as ink on rice paper, and the house around you fades into soft shadows. Your robe rests where you left it, gently folded by the mat. The lantern flickers its last breath, casting brief golden arcs across the wooden floor before settling into stillness. Somewhere in the courtyard, a breeze stirs the bamboo lavesh just enough to remind you that time is still passing, but not enough to pull you from the warmth of your resting mind. You shift your weight on the mat, the straw beneath you creaking faintly, like a polite sigh. The rituals of the day are behind you now. Each careful gesture, each bow, each phrase, each pause has dissolved into memory, wrapped in silence. No more scrolls to unroll, no more robes to adjust, no teacups to balance. You are simply here, breathing in a room shaped by patience. And tomorrow will come, with its ceremonies, its quiet duties, its thousand small dances of etiquette. But not yet. Now, your breath slows. The air smells faintly of jasmine and ink. Your thoughts drift like petals on still water. And as your eyes begin to close, you realize that in this world of rules and ritual, the most sacred act of all may be the one you take now, resting completely, with the peace of a day well balanced. Let go. The ancestors are quiet. The stars wait. Sleep well.